right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for today's seminar on Help Solve Ontario's Stormwater Management Crisis Seminar. Today we have Kyle van der Linden, and he is the program manager at Credit Valley Conservation and has 15 years of experience in green stormwater infrastructure. Based on lessons from the field, he provides facilitation and guidance to municipalities, consultants, and contractors on critical processes for GSI design, construction, inspection, testing, and maintenance. Most recently, Kyle has helped with the development of Landscape Ontario's Fusion Landscape Professional Program and acts as LO's lead FLP instructor. Aside from his work within the stormwater management, Kyle has been a seasonal instructor at Redmere University in urban geography and natural resource management. Now, before we get started, just a few brief housekeeping notes. If you have questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box and we will answer them throughout. If your screen freezes, please hit the reconnect button at the top of the screen and it will refresh your screen. At the end of the session, we will be sending out a link to all of the attendees with the replay of the webinar. It will also be posted on the horttrades.com website. Now it's over to you, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. I'm just getting into just figuring this all out, so bear with me, but all right. So, so today we're going to be talking about more or less kind of the challenges that a lot of cities, a lot of communities are facing, not only in Ontario, but really across Canada. And it has to deal with stormwater management. I mean, this winter was kind of an interesting mix of kind of, we would have 10 centimeters of snow, and then we would have, 20 to 25 millimeters of rain. So these changing weather patterns that we're seeing due to climate change, essentially, which creates warmer conditions in the winter and more extreme events in the summer with shorter duration, high intensity rain events in the summer periods and very localized, makes it complex for city managers, for city staff to manage that water that when it hits our hard surfaces, where does it go, and can have impacts in terms of downstream flooding and water quality impairments. So today we're really going to just do kind of an introductory, what is stormwater runoff, what are the challenges, and how are we addressing it and how are we dealing with it. But more importantly, I think we're going to begin the conversation of how you guys can play a significant role in this. And I'm going to get a little bit more into fusion landscaping, but obviously it kind of segues into that course. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them, or you can direct those to Cassandra Gerard at Landscape Ontario. So right now you probably see that I have my Credit Valley Conservation jacket on. And Credit Valley Conservation is part of the STEP Water Partnership, and STEP stands for Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program. And really our key focus areas are low impact development. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that, which there's a lot of interchangeable terms, so I apologize, which more or less means green stormwater infrastructure. We get into erosion and sediment control, so looking at research and techniques to do a better job of managing sediment and erosion within our streams or within construction sites. Road salt management, that's a big thing as well, because road salt is a major pollutant, but there's ways to be more effective in optimizing its use. So we work with Landscape Ontario, Smart About Salt, on that matter. And also natural features restoration. So that could be in-stream restoration, it could be woodland restoration, wetland restoration, etc. So those are kind of our key focus areas, and we work with our partners over at Toronto Region Conservation Authority and also Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. Okay, so
the next button, just at the bottom of the slide there. Yeah.
All right, there we go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So starting at the basics, the hydrological cycle is kind of a 4-step process. It rains, it lands on the ground, the sun comes out, heats up, water evaporates or transpires from plants and vegetation, rises up, and then as it cools, forms clouds, and then comes back down in the form of precipitation. So as you can see from the slide, the way that the landscape is formed directly impacts the flow and the movement of water. So what happens when we put buildings and cities and towns and communities, that has an impact on the hydrological cycle. So in undeveloped conditions, what we typically see is most of the water, so 40% is taken up by trees and vegetation, and then 50% is infiltrated into the ground, and only 10% of it actually comes in the form of runoff, which then goes into a receiving creek or a stream or river or lake. So that's without that parcel of land being developed. Then as we moved into those cities or into towns, we're obviously increasing the hard surface footprint. So we're removing that natural vegetation, we're removing those soils, and then we're hardening those surfaces. So one can only guess, right, as to what happens. Obviously, if you have a hard surface, you're increasing your amount of runoff, and you're decreasing infiltration, and you're also decreasing evapotranspiration. So there's been a lot of studies that have shown these relationships between hard surface footprint and the health of the watershed. So in that statement at the top of the slide, we talk about pervious versus impervious. As soon as we go beyond 10% impervious area, so hard surface footprint area within a watershed or the area draining into a receiving creek, we have a negative impact. So that's that relationship. So if we look at this relationship curve, it's saying the same thing as the slide before. As soon as you go above 10%, you go from a protected watershed to an impacted watershed, or you go from a protected stream to an impacted stream. And as soon as you get to 25%, that's where you start to see severe degradation of our natural water resources. So why is this all important? Well, it costs a lot of money to treat water. It costs a lot of money to find clean water sources of water. We cannot develop a parcel of land if we don't have access to clean drinking water. And the impacts to our runoff directly impact the quality of drinking water that we have either in the ground or within our receiving streams. So here's a great example of a shot. The picture on the left-hand side, that's actually Square One in Mississauga. So it's just south of Mississauga City Hall. And you can see at that point, Mississauga still had lots of farmland. And maybe some of you guys can remember that, but this is taken back in 1973, an aerial shot. And then the picture on the right was a recent shot, I think it was 2016. So you can see this expansion of city, the expansion of growth, and then what is the corresponding relationship between when it rains and then what happens with that water. And this isn't, unique to Mississauga. It's not unique necessarily to Milton, but the map here shows the progress of development. So the stuff in light gray was really development up to the 1970s and 80s. And then as you get into those darker grays, it goes from 2001 all the way to 2011. So you can see the expansion of cities. And how the hard surface footprint of the Golden Horseshoe or the greater Toronto area has increased over time. So what does that mean for water management? Well, it's got to go somewhere. And where does it typically go? So in most areas, we do not have what we consider the same, we don't have, sorry, let me restart from that. Everything pretty much built up to 1991, between 85 and 91 doesn't have any formal treatment of stormwater management. It doesn't have flood control, and it wasn't built to meet any water quality standards either. So what we see here on this slide deck is essentially what is for the vast majority of the GTA, including Milton, including Kitchener, where I live. So water is collected, goes off of roofs, goes down the downspout, out towards the driveway, into the road, into the catch basin, and then out to a receiving stream. So there's no treatment. Water is quickly and effectively conveyed from our cities into a receiving stream. The challenge or the problem with that is that those impacts or that type of management of water has impacts to our receiving streams and to the Great Lakes, to our groundwater, and it causes a lot of issues, a lot of damages, and this is what we have seen quite extensively over the last 20 years. So we've seen a rise in high intensity rain events. So here are some shots. This is Fletcher's Creek in Brampton. So it flows from Brampton and then it outlets into the Credit River. And this is a challenge that municipalities are dealing with. So over time, because of these high intensity rain events, we cause erosion, and it erodes away where our infrastructure is. So often we use our river corridors to also place critical infrastructure. So at the bottom left, we have a stormwater outfall. On the top left, we have potentially a water main or a sanitary pipe, something conveying that water from one point to another. Here we have base flow, higher increased conditions in terms of flows after a rain event. So this entire watershed has stormwater ponds, but even with stormwater ponds, we're seeing these ponds all release the water at the same time, which has negative downstream impacts. And then in the summertime, we tend to have very low base flow conditions because not enough water is getting back into the ground. So essentially what I've highlighted here is really any development in 1991 or before that. This is the standard type of stormwater management where really the water is being collected into a catch basin and then sent out into a receiving stream. So it makes up 60 to 75% of the GTA. So vast areas of the GTA are without kind of flood control or water quality treatment. And as I highlighted before, we're seeing, a lot of different or greater frequency of what we say 1 in 100 year storm events happening over the last, we have 14 years, but in general, it's been over the last 20 years. We're getting close to 20 years because we have the Potable storm event in 2004 there. So in Mississauga itself, we had a storm event, a flood event in 2009, and then another one in 2013, and then we had a flood event in Burlington in 2014. Kitchener's had a couple in 2016. So there's been a number of events, so it's becoming quite a common problem to deal with. Hard surface footprint, lots of water, and big areas within existing cities where there's nothing holding back that water. I mean, this is a classic shot of some of the flooding that took place in Toronto, the water collecting under bridges, and people trying to drive through. That has impacts on, obviously our emergency response services. It has impacts on businesses. It has impacts on people trying to get from point A to point B. So it costs municipalities a ton of money. It also costs, private property owners. So landowners or homeowners have been directly impacted. Basement flooding is on the rise. It's now the #1 expense for insurance companies is water damage to homes. So it's also a struggle for not only individuals, but the companies that are insuring these individuals as well. And then for municipalities, before we showed you guys some infrastructure of it being, within the Fletcher's Creek corridor, that stuff being eroded away. Well, after this water collects under the bridges, often stuff's ripped apart. So here was a shot, I believe it was in Dixie Road in Mississauga after the 2013 flood event. But again, all this stuff needs to be repaired, replaced, and it's quite expensive. So as I highlighted, pretty much up to 1991, we only had very minimal stormwater management within existing cities. And most of it was just quickly conveying water from property or from hard surface to a receiving stream. After 1991, we got into looking at water quality and trying to make improvements as ways that we could improve or treat runoff to reduce the amount of sediment being dumped into receiving streams. And then now what we're focusing on is not only water quality, but also looking at water balance. So looking at infiltration capacity, trying to get the water back into the ground, being taken up by trees, vegetation, etc., so that when it rains, water is going into the ground, and only a portion of it is turning into runoff and going into receiving creeks. So for us to do that, we take what we call a treatment train approach or an integrated water management approach. So the first step of what we saw is, okay, we need to provide flood control and erosion control. And this primarily took the place of what we saw in terms of stormwater ponds. And then as we started focusing on water quality, some of the reasons why it was because we started seeing algae blooms. So even though, most of the focus has been in urban areas, we get deposits of phosphorus making its way into receiving creeks, and then that has an impact on those creeks and the water quality found within them. And eventually those creeks end up draining into our Great Lakes system. I was originally born in Chatham, Kent, and Chatham is, if you see Point Pelee, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but that whole area now struggles with algae blooms throughout the summer period. It's not like you can go and jump in the water. You kind of have to see where the algae bloom is. And so that impacts, recreation, it impacts tourism, and it also impacts drinking water. The city of Toledo had to shut down their water intake because they had cyanobacteria, which is found in the algae blooms, and they couldn't provide drinking water to their city for 3 days, which had a $40 million economic impact. So quite significant. So that's why we're really focusing on this kind of integrated stormwater approach, integrated stormwater management. And, kind of the flashy term is that the green stormwater infrastructure approach. So what we're trying to do is not just treat it before the water empties into a creek. We're trying to treat it where it lands as it's conveyed from point A to point B, so treating it along the path, and then treating it at the end point before it empties into the creek. So kind of follows the slide deck here, treat it where it falls, treat it along the path, and then treat it before it goes into a lake and river. So this first kind of rules or approach to integrated water management from the start is we try to minimize or reduce the hard surface footprint. Now, it doesn't mean, I know, with the landscaping industry, there's obviously big business in hardscapes, and that can still remain. And there's lots of different options now for like pervious pavements or porous concrete. So it's really about, if we can avoid it, we try to minimize or increasing the hard surface footprint. If we can't, there's alternative products and materials that can provide still a hard surface footprint, but also allow for that water to soak through. We'll get into that a little bit further along. The other big piece too is protecting existing green space or vegetation. So if there's, a woodlot, if there's a woodland, if there's trees, we want to protect those features as much as possible. We don't necessarily want to take them down to start something new. We want to protect what's there and enhance it if possible. And then lastly, it's really about increasing vegetation and plantings. You're really trying to change or increase the disruption to the flow of water. So by including a diversity of vegetation and plants, if water's coming out the downspout from the roof and you're going and it's just straight grass, that water's going to fly right through it pretty much. But if you're putting, gardens and plantings, etc., that's going to have a huge impact on disrupting that flow. It's also going to suck up that water, and that water is going to be lost to evapotranspiration. So, in general, I want to highlight that trees are effective tools in stormwater management, and they play a significant role in green stormwater infrastructure. The chart or the diagram on the left gives an example of a highly engineered approach to how trees can be applied within an urban setting, within the road right of way. And these are some of the practices that, we're working with our municipal partners in getting into the ground, because municipalities are trying to manage the water that's coming off roadways, and they're seeing trees as effective tools to do that. And the other piece on the diagram, or the bar graph on the right, gives the evapotranspiration rates of different types of species of trees, and it's in the gallons per day. So not only does the canopy capture that rain event, the water that lands on the ground is sucked up by the roots of those trees, and then that water is lost, quite significant. So if I ripped out a large mature tree and I had to, say, build something to replace its stormwater value, it could be quite costly to do that on and I mean stormwater value on an annual basis. So if they're losing 50, I think it goes up to 20 gallons per day, you're looking at 50 to 100 liters per day that water is being lost to the atmosphere. That's quite significant. And it'd be quite costly to try to engineer something to replace that value of just keeping that tree there. As we get into these more, engineered applications, there's a diversity of green stormwater infrastructure or integrated water management that can be applied to different land uses. So not only private property, but also public property. So I'm just going to highlight some of those to you guys. So we saw that shot of square one at the beginning back in '73 and then back in 2016. And and that's been a problem area for the city of Mississauga, as you can see from the amount of hard surface footprint that they have. So they've had quite a bit of flooding within that area. It's called Cooksville Creek, and the Cooksville Creek watershed. So they're looking at innovative ways to manage and treat stormwater. And Elm Drive was designed and constructed back in 2010. It's one of the first projects that I got involved with. And we've done substantial monitoring of this project. And essentially the water is making its way, the road is graded towards first a permeable paver parking lay-by, and then any excess water is then collected by catch basins, and then they have lateral drains emptying that water into those what we call them bioretention planters, but essentially they're rain gardens. Sorry. Oh, perfect. This is showing you exactly what I was explaining. So if you follow the path, those blue arrows show you the direction and the flow path of the water and how the water is then collected and then making its way into those bioretention planters or those rain garden features. And this has done quite an effective job. So Carrie, if you don't mind playing the first video. So this is a video that shows the movement during a pretty high intensity storm event. And it's coming from the road. What you guys see here, it's running over the permeable pavers. So these permeable pavers, this is on a 6% slope too. So we're still getting lots of flow. It is infiltrating, but any of that excess water you'll see is getting collected by the catch basins. And then it's going to the lateral drain. Oh, shoot. But anyways, it's going to the lateral drain and then spilling out in the into that bioretention planter. Can you play it one more time? It seemed to cut off a piece at the end there, or I hope it did. Anyways. So you can see the amount of water that's collected by those bioretention planters. If you can pull the slides back up, perfect. And this shows you, this would have been just going into the catch, if it was just standard road cross section, going into the catch basin and then going into essentially the municipal stormwater system and then emptying directly into the creek. So now that water is infiltrating into the ground through those pavers. Any excess water is in the catch basin, and then it's into the bioretention planters or those rain garden features with trees and shrubs. And then that's also infiltrating into the ground. So it's providing quite a bit of treatment. And what we've seen, we've monitored this site quite substantially. It's one of the longest sites that has been monitored, and it's been going on since 2010, essentially, when it was constructed. So, sorry, I'm in my daughter's room, so I'm just telling her that she can't come in yet. And what we've seen through that monitoring is rain events from 2 mils to 25 mils, so that's 1 inch. We're seeing a 93% runoff volume reduction. So we're monitoring the outfall of that bioretention Elm Drive site. So we're only seeing runoff leave that site maybe one storm event every month. So it's quite substantial. Even with events that are 30 mils, so like 1.2 inches or greater, we're still seeing close to a 60% reduction in runoff volume. So that water that would have flown directly into Cooksville Creek is now getting treated, infiltrated, filtered, cleaned, and cooled. So it's pretty exciting to see those results. So this kind of describes the criteria by which we're evaluating the Elm Drive site. So what we're seeing is that it was designed to only manage 15 millimeters, but we're seeing that it's completely infiltrating up to the 24 millimeter event. It's designed to remove 80% total suspended solids or sediment. It's removing 88% total phosphorus. So if you think about those algae blooms, Lake Erie, it's removing 91% of the phosphorus that would have flown directly into Cooksville Creek and then into Lake Ontario. And even metals, we have zinc removal. We're seeing, the criteria is we're going to try to get 20 micrograms in terms of the concentration. We're only seeing 12 micrograms. So we're seeing, metal load reduction is quite substantial. From a flooding piece, we're seeing a 60% reduction in peak flows. So originally, green stormwater infrastructure primarily focused on water quality. It wasn't so much flood control. But even though it's designed for that, we're still seeing what we call peak flow reduction. So there's a lag time from when that water leaves the site, and it takes pressure off the municipal system and reduces the risk for downstream flooding. So it's quite exciting to see. The other big piece too that people don't think about all the time is also the impact that the vegetation has on just temperature. By changing the landscape and adding more vegetation, you can have quite a substantial impact. So we did FLIR mapping of the site, and excuse me, off the asphalt, we're seeing 38 degrees Celsius. And then if you look at the permeable pavers, we're seeing 31.8 degrees Celsius to 32.3. I apologize if I'm coming up really close. The grass is 22 degrees Celsius, and then the bioretention planters are even cooler than that, and they're at 20 degrees Celsius. So if you compare, hard surface asphalt at 30 to 38 degrees Celsius versus the rain guard or the bioretention planter at 20 degrees, that's quite substantial. And then the collective or the cumulative impact of that, can have benefits against urban heat island. And urban heat island, the impacted measure of that is actually people dying from, hot temperatures during, during the summer period. So if we can reduce the overall amount of people going to the hospital with putting in more green storm infrastructure, that's fantastic. And these are some of the co-benefits of doing this type of work. The other thing too that is a big problem with urban areas and stormwater ponds, you saw that 38 degree Celsius temperature of asphalt, that heats up water. So when the rainfall hits the asphalt, we've all been in summer storm events where you see steam rising off the road. Well, that has a negative impact on receiving streams as well. We have sensitive fish species that are that gets impacted by hot runoff flowing into the receiving streams. Red-side dace is a local threatened species that is impacted by what we call thermal pollution. And so what we also evaluate from this site is the ability of green stormwater infrastructure to cool the water as well. So I said it cleans, it cools. Well, here's quantitative proof that it actually does cool the water. So when it came into the site and when it's leaving, we're seeing a 5 to 7 degree temperature reduction. So that's quite substantial. If we were to compare that to a stormwater pond, we see a 5 to 7 degree increase in temperature because it increases the surface footprint of the water. When it flows in, it gets heated up, and then when it leaves, it's leaving at a hotter temperature. So green stormwater infrastructure compared to kind of conventional stormwater ponds has quite a benefit in terms of water cooling. The other site that we looked at too, IMAX, and they did a parking lot expansion. They had high groundwater here. And so we looked at two different technologies. We did permeable pavers, and then we also did a bioswale within the existing parking lot island. So if you don't mind playing that video, Carrie. It's another video during a rain event, but it shows you here the water moving from the parking lot into the bioswale, making its way through the plant material, through the vegetation, and then in through the soils, and then it leaves the site. So again, we're instead of that water immediately rushing off the site, we're disrupting the flow, and we're getting it into these features. And again, it's getting cleaned, it's getting cooled, and the volume of water is also reduced as well in terms of the stormwater runoff. So it's quite interesting. And yeah, it's been fantastic to see. This was built back in 2013. So we've seen how the vegetation has evolved, how it's grown, what does well, what doesn't do well. So here's some quantitative results. We've also monitored this site. So that's some of our sites, we see quite substantial runoff volume reduction. We had actually 3 of these different types of bioswales. So these are kind of extended rain gardens that move the water from one point to the next. And we're seeing runoff volume reduction from anywhere from 64% up to 90%. And then we're seeing total suspended solids, so sediment. We're seeing substantial reduction in the amount of sediment leaving the site. We're also seeing substantial reduction in phosphorus. So we're at 50% on the 57% on the low end, up to 90% on the high end. And that's total phosphorus. So it gives you dissolved phosphorus concentration as well, and total phosphorus concentration. But in terms of the load or the mass of phosphorus being reduced, it's anywhere from 57 to 90%. So again, when you take the cumulative impact of these technologies and you apply it wide scale, that's really going to have an impact on, our receiving streams, but also the Great Lakes, which is our drinking water source. And then we get into some of these softer projects. So schools are quite great spots to implement these types of technologies. They act as community hubs. It's a good way to showcase different types of ways to manage stormwater on not only on the school property but on people's property potentially. So we've built a number of these projects along the way. This was a site that we did at a local church. Same thing. It was quite a large feature. And the vegetation, we have a lot of microbial action here. So we've done tests on it to see different types of soil media and how well they do at removing pollutants. We're starting to test different soil medias as well. So this was a permeable paver site. So this is up in Alton, just south, the village of Alton, just south of Orangeville. And this was behind Alton Public School, but also next to their main park. We then later built 2 rain gardens here as well. But you see the water running off the asphalt into the permeable pavers, and then any excess runoff makes its way into the rain gardens. This was one of our earlier residential road LID projects that we worked with the city of Mississauga. So the city of Mississauga took the lead on this, as well as Alum Drive. But we helped out with the design and providing construction supervision and documentation and monitoring of the performance of these sites. So here we gave homeowners the option of either doing sod or they could do a perennial garden. And it's been interesting to see how it's evolved. This was built back in 2013. And some of these gardens remain, but most of them have been converted to sod because people find it easier to maintain. So this was a big learning curve for us as to, when you pitch an idea to a resident, they have to be bought into it. And because if the expectation they're going to maintain it, they got to give them something that is easy to maintain. I'm sure you guys all know about that. Oh, this was one of our last residential projects that we did. So we built these in 2014, and this was also in the village of Alton. So we built a number of rain gardens. We also did soakaway pits, which is another type of technology. Essentially, it's a pit with filter fabric, 3/4 inch clear stone, and then it's taking water from a roof downspout. But here, what you guys see is the rain garden that was constructed, and there's one here that right in front of us, and then there was another one right to the right that was managing the one downspout on the one side, and then there was another downspout on the garage on the other side that was managing that rainfall. So this brings me to here. So this is where, if you haven't heard of this, it is a program that is offered by Landscape Ontario, and it's called the Fusion Landscape Professional Program. And it's a certification program where landscape contractors such as yourself learn about these different types of technologies. We didn't get into all the different types. We didn't get into the design aspects. I really just wanted to give you a high level overall thing. But they run training. We just did our training. We did 2 trainings this past winter, one for landscape contractors that are outside of Region of Peel and York Region. And then we gave another training for contractors that work within Peel Region and York Region. So the seed funding came from the region of York and also the region of Peel. So why there's preference or given to those contractors. But now we're starting to do contractors outside of those areas, and we did our first class this past February as well. So we're hoping to do one in the London area this coming winter, but I think that will be dependent on COVID to a certain degree. But I also wanted to highlight some of the results of these fusion landscapes as well. So it's really about designing to right plant for the right place, but it's designing for low water use, use of stormwater to treat and manage stormwater on site. So we call that lot level stormwater management. And it's really about creating beautiful landscapes. So it's this fusion of kind of traditional landscape approach with lot level stormwater management. So you guys are obviously the professionals in the field. You guys know how to do landscaping. I really speak to it about the stormwater perspective. But that being said, they did some initial demonstration projects in the Peel region, and we assessed the results. And really what we've seen, all these graphs pretty much come together, and they ended up, we saw a spike in the use of water to get the gardens established, but then that water usage came down. So they saw improved water efficiency compared to the neighborhood control. They also saw a reduction in peak flow. So again, that helps from flood prevention. So that water is being kept and held on site. It's not just rushing off the property, which is great. And then they also saw a reduction in total suspended solids and total phosphorus. And I couldn't fit this one in, but they also saw a reduction in runoff volume as well. So altogether, it provides that lot level stormwater management that cities need. And really what I was highlighting at the beginning of this presentation was cities are struggling to deal with the amount of stormwater that these hard surface areas are creating. There's only so much water that can be managed within public right-of-ways, really within the road right-of-way. So you guys play a critical role in addressing these water management challenges. Fusion Landscapes, the Fusion Landscape program, provides training in how you can create these landscapes. Maybe you guys have already been doing it. I know a lot of landscapers are already addressing water issues, and it's packaging it all together for these guys. So they said, "Oh, I did this all along." It's really just putting a name to it. And so the results of this is showing this is having a very positive impact on water management, on stormwater management, and shows that landscapers are providing a critical role here. And really what we want to do is get to this wide scale application point so that we see the cumulative impact, and then we see healthier streams, we see healthier creeks, a healthier Great Lakes, and then a healthier us as well, because the Great Lakes, that's our drinking water source, and it's also, recreation. It's an economic, it's a tourism attraction, etc. So it has economic benefits as well. So I think that's it. I don't know if I have any more. Oh, okay. So just to break it down a little bit further, the course, it's 2 days, focuses on design, install, and maintenance of Fusion Landscapes. There's an exam at the end, which is given by Landscape Ontario. And this is Landscape Ontario's program. And then there's a certification process. So that's all directed by Cassandra and Sally Harvey. And if you guys are looking for more information, I believe if you go to Landscape Ontario's website and you type in Fusion Landscaping, there's information for landscape contractors and members. And then if you just type in this website, this is kind of the page for residents. So they're marketing it within the industry, and then they're marketing it to the end users, which are the homeowners and businesses. So And then if you guys want to get a hold of me, if you have any questions, happy to chat further. That's my cell phone. Obviously, I'm working from home, so you can get a hold of me there, or you can send me an email. So we got 12 minutes for questions. Hopefully, not too many of you guys have fallen asleep or started browsing the internet.
Kyle.
I know that's always a challenge.
Well, we do have one question here. So many of the areas I work in have clay soils on very small lots. Any advice?
Yes. So one of the critical processes in the design process of any fusion landscape is to understand the infiltration rates. So even though you have clay soils, doesn't mean that the water doesn't necessarily infiltrate. You should try to do a pit test as a simple infiltration test where you dig down 30 centimeters, you fill that hole up with water, let it drain, and then fill it up with again, and then you measure how quickly the water dissipates or goes down. And so based on that infiltration rate, you can size these features accordingly. And that's something that we talk about during the Fusion Landscape course is how do you size these practices depending on the native infiltration rates of the soils. The other alternative is that you can remove those clay soils. You can put in a much sandier soil mix to improve the infiltration rate, but often in those conditions, we have an underdrain that then goes and is able to outlet to the municipal system. Now you're dealing with private property, you're not supposed to tie into the stormwater system, so it does make it a little bit more challenging. So if you're dealing with tighter soils, your footprint of the fusion landscape feature usually has to increase then, which I know is more challenging if you're dealing with tight property constraints as well. So.
All right. And that was actually the only question that we had. So I want to thank you very much for everything today, Kyle. And we will be sending out the presentation to everybody, as well as the recording from this seminar later on this afternoon. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks so much, Kyle.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.